welcome to our event where three members of the British Museum's Youth Collective, Tessa, Layla and Naomi, will be interviewing Hartwig Fischer, the director of the British Museum.
We will be asking questions about the relationship between young people and the museum and answering questions sent in by you.
This is part of a series we've created called Unlocking the Museum. You can check out our other events on this channel and on our social media.
My name is Tessa and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Layla and my pronouns are also she, her.
My name is Naomi and my pronouns are she, them.
I'm Hartwig and I suppose my pronouns are he and his.
So we're going to start with a couple of quick fire questions, one from each of us before we go into the main questions. So Layla.
Hartwig, what were your experiences with museums as a young person?
Museums were very important places for me very early on to understand what human beings are about and what I might aspire to grow into, really, I think.
Kind of going off that, if you were 18 again, which part of the collection at the British Museum do you think you would connect most with?
I would connect most with Africa, Oceania, and the Americas on the one hand, and with prints and drawings on the other at the age of 18, I think.
Similarly to that, if you could be director of any museum in the whole wide world, which would it be and why?
I don't think I'd be director of a museum. I'd be rather an enabler of museums. I think I would find it very intriguing to help people create their own museums for their own purposes, with their own questions and their own very specific collections, and I'd be intrigued to see what comes out of that.
Okay, so now we've got some questions that are from members of the collective. So what do you think makes the British Museum relevant to young people?
Well, I think the British Museum is really a place of discovery. If you want to know about yourself, it's helpful to know about other human beings in other times and epochs and in other places of the world. I think we all have our own background, even though especially through media, we are now more linked up. I think making the concrete experience of, encountering what people over the millennia, over 2 million years have created to shape their world and to shape their communities is absolutely fascinating. It's very easy to do that at the British Museum. It's free of charge. You just walk in and it's yours. That said, you have to decide to walk up the stairs, through the colonnade, into the Great Court, and then explore the gallery. So that's perhaps less evident than, say, walking into something with a less imposing facade. So what we try to improve is the ease and the self-evidence of this place being for you, being for young people, and making it easy to navigate, making it easy to find answers to your questions, making it easy to understand that this is a unique place of discovery.
I was just wondering if there was any specific ways that you think the museum has tried to connect with young people and make the museum less austere and to make that facade less intimidating.
If you think of the Samsung Digital Learning Center, for instance, that we have now offered for quite a number of years, that enables children, young people to engage with the collection through contemporary digital media. And you can do that on site, you can do that with family, you can do that on your own. And through these last 12 months of lockdown, we've used that also to communicate via digital remotely. Keep the connection, keep the engagement, keep the fascination, keep the pleasure and the desire to explore. So I think we've harnessed these media to better reach young people, And I think we've also learned to interact much more, to listen, to understand, what is on young people's mind, what is their concerns. And of course, there are many, depending on where they are, where they come from, what their background, what their experience, what their aspirations are. So I think it's a very dynamic process of opening up, of improving, of dialoguing and developing.
Thanks. And kind of on the subject of modern media, and I'm sure we'll address more in depth like young people's concerns later on in this video, but talking about modern media and how people, like young people specifically, relate to the museum, we're going to show you some TikToks and memes that young people have made in response to the museum and about their feelings. So are you aware of TikTok? Have you come across it?
I can imagine.
So just for anyone who's at home, TikTok is a sharing platform for short form videos. TikToks usually come from meme culture, where you take a piece of media, usually a photo or a video or a song from popular culture, and then change the context for comedic purposes. So we would really love to show these to you and get your response. So this is a video made by a user called Aero Witch, and it's to a soundbite called How Bizarre.
Well, this obviously relates to parts of the collection that are hotly debated, and the debate obviously is about the history, if you like, of collecting and of transferring objects from one region to another. So you can find this bizarre, obviously, if you think that everything should remain where it was originally created. Humans have always not only created objects, used objects, reused them, and these objects then have triggered new developments, new understanding, and understanding also of how cultures relate to each other.
Thank you. And on the topic of like problematic acquisition and like transfer of objects, this particular TikTok is from Pariah Nation, and it's an educational video which is captioned "How many stolen artifacts are in Europe's museums?" So in this video, Pariah Nation is talking about like some statistics and kind of objects that he feels shouldn't be in like the British Museum and other European museums.
These numbers refer to objects from Africa in European collections. That's what he refers to. And these objects have come to these collections in many different ways. They were traded, they were collected, sometimes they were plundered following military raids. And I think it's very important when we talk about these things that on the one hand, we are very clear, and the British Museum makes great efforts to be very clear and very explicit about this, how objects have actually come into the collection. The itinerary of objects, and very often objects do not come directly from a place, say in Africa, to the British Museum, but via several stations, if you like, or several successive ownerships, private collectors, for instance. So you have in these 69,000 objects from Africa in the British Museum's collection, a great number of different ways of collecting. And I think it is not, it's not doing justice to either side if you say they're stolen. And I think it's very important to be clear about that. You know, the simple fact that objects, say, from Africa or from the Middle East or from the Americas are in other places than the places where they were created in itself does not constitute or does not mean that they were stolen. So again, I would take this video as a point of departure to discuss the many ways human beings have been involved in creating, exchanging, transferring, taking objects through the millennia. And that in itself is an incredibly interesting, fascinating aspect of our shared complicated history, of human history.
And this is our last one, which is also a meme for a bit of fun. So this one is addressing the Elgin marbles.
What does it make you think?
I think that, you know, it's poking a bit of fun at the museum.
Yeah, and to make a quick contribution to it and trigger new thinking and introduce new ideas.
And I also think like playfulness and like not taking yourself too seriously is a really great way to connect with young people. It just kind of the facade, as you talked about, it being kind of austere and inaccessible sometimes to young people, kind of poking fun and being playful is a great way to kind of have that connection.
That's an absolutely wonderful thing you've just said, you know, because obviously throughout the museum, you could hear the laughter of so many human beings thinking about the objects that they have created and shared and cracked jokes on, and perhaps surprised and fooled each other. So I think, you know, at once the visit of the Uni of Ife, the spiritual head of the Yoruba, and he came to the museum, which was a fantastic visit, fantastic conversations we've had with him, and the people who accompanied him from Ife. And he called the museum a house of spirits, and said that while he was there, he could communicate with the spirits from all times and from all regions of the world. And I like your idea of this, you know, the lightheartedness and poking fun at yourself and at others. And I'm sure that while he was talking to me, telling me that he was communicating with all these spirits, that he must have heard a lot of laughter at the same time.
So those are the ones that we wanted to show you. And though they're just also a bit of fun, they're really great at showing the perception of the museum from young people. And they're a really kind of truthful dialogue about some of the kind of concerns that young people have about the museum and about its collection. And so kind of from that, I was wondering, how do you think perception and controversy impact the relationship of the museum with young people?
I think it helps the museum to be very open and to be truthful and clear, and to share what we know about our history, the history of our collection, the history of so many people who put their passion into creating this, and the many dialogues they have had over the centuries with so many people. So I think that unease is something that helps the museum to answer that question by coming up with very clear and accessible information and engaging in that dialogue. And that dialogue is a dialogue that we are having with young people from around the world, really. And it's not something which is limited to London or to the UK. It's a world dialogue about the future of cultural heritage and the way, we make use of it and we share it and we make it accessible. And I think that's extremely important, that, we understand that this is not for the happy few, but this is really for everybody. And understanding these concerns and engaging with these concerns, I think, helps the museum vitally to make it accessible, to make it easy to make use of it. And I think it's that, that is at least my experience from these conversations, which will not end. They are ongoing, and they will keep being very much at the forefront. But I think the trust that these institutions, despite the many questions that many young people have, enjoy, is also down to the fact that they do engage in dialogue, and they take criticism very seriously and try to find answers through conversation, through dialogue.
And speaking of trying to find answers, you said in response to the TikToks about how certain objects in the museum have come to be. And we were wondering, what would you say to a young person interested in better understanding how the objects at the museum have been collected?
So when you go to the museum, you find information on panels and labels, so near the objects or groups of objects. And there's a lot of information about that. There is, for instance, right now, a trail through various galleries of the museum, where you see that in relation to certain objects, we talk about the relation between empire and collecting. You go to the Benin bronzes, for instance, and you find a lot of information about what had happened in 1897, how the objects were taken, how they were transferred from Benin City to the UK and then dispersed. You go to the Parthenon sculptures, and there again, you find not only the objects, but you find a lot of information about what the Parthenon was, how it evolved. There was a temple, then it was a church, then it became a mosque, and then became a monument. How those sculptures, which are now in the British Museum, were brought first to the UK and later to the British Museum. You also learn about how people in Greece feel about it, what the Greek government would like to see. So in the room, we give ample space to different views and different voices. So it's very clear that there are different takes on this, different opinions, different attitudes, and a lot of passion all around. And then finally, if you explore the website of the museum and Collection Online, for instance, where we have 4 million objects accessible, 2 million with images, and a lot of information on provenance. And then we have the great curators of the museum who speak about objects on social media. And there again, you learn a lot about how these objects came to the museum, how they entered the museum, how they were interpreted over the centuries. And do you understand that the interpretation of objects itself is a creative process that never stops, and that involves the input of very many people.
And with that, can I ask, so one of the aims of the Greengross Youth Collective programme that we're part of is to inspire greater change within the museum to improve the relationship between young people. And is there anything that you're doing right now to improve the relationship between young people and the museum?
The Youth Collective itself is a big step for us to improve these relations. Working with you, learning from you, understanding what is important for you and what you would like us to address is obviously key to move things forward. But then let me give you another example. We recently had an exhibition on manga, which few people would expect in the British Museum, I think. And this was a great exhibition. It was hugely popular. And it completely shifted the composition of our audiences. Almost half of the visitors to this exhibition were younger people. So there too, you see that as the British Museum addresses contemporary issues and looks at contemporary media through which young people voice their interests, their concerns, their passions. I think that's another way for the museum to engage. And then we have the Friends of the Museum, the young Friends of the Museum, that make specific offers, again, through dialogue, through exchange, for younger people. So I think if you look at what the museum offers, there is a lot, and I should say much more needs to be done to make the museum a place that is cherished as a place where you make discoveries that matter for you. And that is also a place where you like to come, to hang out, to meet your friends, to sit around and debate, have a good time. I think all that is part of a museum.
So in March, we did a call out and received lots of questions from young people outside of the collective. So we've got just a selection of the questions that we received to ask you. And some of these questions have been edited for clarity. So Sasha, age 21, says that a lot of people my age and younger feel like museums are austere and far from their interests and values. Do you plan on creating more exhibitions on themes like sustainability and decolonization of our vision of history to reduce that discrepancy of values?
That's a very good question, I think. Yes, the answer is very clearly yes. And I would invite Sasha to come and have a look at what we are doing. We've just finished a huge exhibition on the Arctic that looked at the relation between culture and climate, showing in close collaboration with many communities from the circumpolar regions, how the peoples in the north over millennia have managed to live and survive in a very trying climate, and how they were creative in managing life under these circumstances, and also in producing objects, beautiful objects, be it clothing, be it tools, be it objects of rituals and cult, or fun, and communication and music. And we had many debates in the program on questions of climate change, the impact of human beings, of politics, the economy, what needs to be done to meet the Paris aims, Paris goals. So I think that's a good example of the museum addressing absolutely crucial and central issues of today that affect everybody. And we had a lot of young people also participating in this and following it. The other aspect of empire, colonialism, decolonization, you will have seen that the museum over these last 5 years has done quite a number of exhibitions, bigger and smaller exhibitions, to address exactly that question, to look at the history of colonialism, to look at the history of collecting, to look at how people in other areas viewed and view Europe. So I think there is quite a bit in the program of the British Museum that really responds to these expectations. And I would agree, much more needs to be done, and we are looking forward to doing much more.
And Samuel wants to know, how does external funding impact the running of the museum?
It's important to understand that the British Museum receives a substantial amount of money from the government, the so-called grant in aid, that covers roughly 40% of our expenditures. 60% of the money we need to run the museum, to do the programs, to work across the globe, to do exhibitions, but also to work with colleagues in other areas of the world to protect cultural heritage, needs to be, we need to find this money through different funding streams. One is commercial, by selling objects in the shops, by having cafes, restaurants, by letting our space, and through other activities. And then through philanthropy. The museum, fortunately, has a great number of patrons, of friends, of patrons, of benefactors, of supporters, of sponsors that help us realize our programs. So it's a mixed economy, but it's very important to understand that the museum is intellectually independent.
This is another one from a member of the public, Maisie. So Maisie asks, in your current acquisitions for artifacts, are they more contemporary and are they more UK based or still international?
They are very contemporary. They are not exclusively contemporary, I have to say. We keep collecting for all departments, but contemporary objects play an important part. I'll give you 2 examples. When the pandemic started, we got together with colleagues from around the world, colleagues who participated in our international training program, which brings colleagues, young colleagues from around the world to the British Museum every summer to exchange, to discuss, to learn, to share skills, share experience. So we have a network of roughly 300 colleagues now, and we contacted them and asked them, can you help us to bring together a collection of objects that show how people in various parts of the world have reacted to the pandemic? And a way to do that was to look at masks. You know, the mask is probably the one object which was shared most widely during these last 12 months. And it's absolutely amazing to see how people in different parts of the world have shaped, decorated these masks. So it's super contemporary material that will enable future generations to show, once they exhibit this, how we together have lived through this experience and what we share and what differentiates us. So that's a very good example, I think, of how the museum collects. As soon as we reopen the museum, you will see that there's an exhibition which is called Reflections in the galleries of the Prints and Drawings Department. And that is a collection of modern and contemporary works from the Middle East and North Africa. So again, and it was collected in the Middle East department. So again, you have a department which has important collections of ancient material, which is completely engaged with contemporary creation and tries to bring that into the museum, working with the artists, with gallerists, with collectors. So yes, contemporary is very important. And as you can see, global is very important. This is not limited to the UK. It's reaching out and working with people from around the globe that continues to inform the collection of the British Museum.
Thank you for that. For our final question, what are your hopes for the relationship of the British Museum and young people in the future?
My hope would be that young people feel that the British Museum is a place they go to discover the world, to discover their own history, and that they use to define their own place in the world, where they find support for what they want to be, what they aspire to be, and where they come together to debate, to discuss, and just enjoy. I think, for me, the museum from very early on, and I was 13 when I started to go to museums, it's always been a place of fantastic pleasure, of excitement, of discovery, of learning, of sharing. And, that would be my hope, that this museum continues to grow its, the share of young people in its audience, and that young people really use it, make use of it, and just activate it for themselves and do it in their own way. There's so many ways to do this, and nobody can really tell you how to do it. You define it yourself.
Thank you, Hartvig, for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who sent in questions, and thank you for watching. Make sure to check out other events as part of Unlocking the Museum, and follow the Youth Collective on Instagram at BM Young People.